Morena koutou katoa, he mihi mahana ki a koutou. Ko Helen Brown tuku ingoa, no Ngāi Tahu ki Murihiku me taere hoki a hau, nō reira ko Waitaha Ngāti Māmoe, Waitaha oku iwi. So, my name's Helen Brown, I work for the Ngāi Tahu Archive. I think the two previous speakers have really highlighted something really important, which is the passion that I think almost all of us have who work in the heritage sector. It's sort of a deeply personal experience and connection that a lot of us have, and that's the same for me. My kōrero will probably be less personal, but it's certainly part of my story as well. So I'll tell you first about my job. I love my job, but then I'll step back and explain a little bit about how I came to the role that I'm in, which is really through connections, as Corbin referred to, whakapapa, osmosis, and just serendipity through meeting people and connecting with people. So on this slide here it says Ngā te iwi, mā te iwi, which effectively means by the tribe, for the tribe, or by the people, for the people. And I'm in the really fortunate position of working in a tribal organisation. So I have previously worked in institutions with deep colonial roots, you know, libraries and for the Crown, for the Council. But the Ngāi Tahu Archive was actually formed in 1978, but since 2012 it's been reinvigorated and really had a dedicated team built around it. So this photograph was taken a month or so ago. We recently relocated our archive to be co-located with Archives New Zealand. So I think Joe will be talking to you later, who is from Archives New Zealand, which is the government institution that looks after Crown archives. So Ngāi Tahu have come into partnership with the Crown, which is quite extraordinary, but it's basically a lease arrangement. So we've partnered with the Crown, and you can see the signage there. You've got the Archives New Zealand sign alongside the Ngāi Tahu Archive. My team is mixed in there with the Archives New Zealand staff, so we're cohabiting, but our two archives are quite separate things. So the Ngāi Tahu Archive, which we are charged with caring for, includes the records of Te Rūnanga o Ngāi Tahu, including the Ngāi Tahu Māori Trust Board, which is the organisation and its predecessors that predated Te Rūnanga o Ngāi Tahu. So Te Rūnanga o Ngāi Tahu is a tribal entity that was established at the time of the Ngāi Tahu settlement, effectively. So it's existed since 1998. Yep, the main offices of Te Rūnanga o Ngāi Tahu are in Addington, but as I said, our team is this little unit. There's only 6 of us, or 6.5, and we've moved out to this space in Wigram. So the archive itself is made up of, the papers of Tront, the Trust Board, and of specific individuals, selected individuals. It's also increasingly our work is around, and a lot of my work is discovering material in the archive and digitally repatriating it. So Hatisa talked about repatriation in reference to Taonga and objects, taking objects back to the people. In a lot of instances where we can't do that, particularly with documents, we can get digital copies. So that's a huge part of my job and something I absolutely love, because I'm a sort of an archive hound. So I love searching through archives and discovering stuff, and there's still so much to be discovered. So that's in government institutions, in museums and archives overseas, universities and museums within New Zealand, also family collections, so whānau who want to share their material with us. So all of that stuff is in the Ngāi Tahu Archive. So our team is charged with caring for that collection, but my work is largely around making that information more accessible through developing content. So I'm a writer, a researcher. I produce resources, and one of which is this one, which is called Tangata Ngāi Tahu. So this is part of a broad project, writing biographies of Ngāi Tahu people in order to celebrate their histories and their stories. This work involves working with the descendants of all of those tipuna. So that's a huge part of my work, is working with people. And it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of cups of tea. And these are images mostly from the launch of that book, Tangata Ngāi Tahu, which was launched in 2017. So in addition to working with our people, I work with, as I said before, with archives. Discovering material in the archive and then utilising it and pushing it out to our people primarily first, but also to everyone, to the wider world, because the majority of the projects we work on are they're accessible to the public, to everyone. So in this image here, there's a photograph there of Te One Tāre Tikau, and the text there is actually part of a biography that he wrote of his father. So in a sense, we're continuing the work of our tipuna in this regard, in terms of collating life stories. Now, all of you who are at high school will have a copy of this book in your library, because one of our kaupapa is to make our information available to our own first, but then also to everyone. So we have provided copies of this book out to all schools in Te Waipounamu. So check it out in your library. And I'm currently working on a second volume that will be published in November this year. A second project, which some of you may be familiar with, is called Kahuru Manu. It's the Ngāi Tahu Digital Atlas. So it again is a publicly accessible resource which maps Ngāi Tahu place names, trails, the history of Ngāi Tahu Māori reserves, which were allocated under various bits of legislation after the land sales and the signing of the treaty. With that project, my role in that, again, is research. So that includes researching material, like documentary material, produced by our own, such as this map here, which was drawn by the gentleman you saw earlier, Te One Tāre Tikau. This is a map that he drew of Akaroa Harbour, so all of the place names there. We've then done further research on, and they appear on Kahuru Manu, the digital atlas. So in your packs, if you picked up the packs that have been prepared, there's information about all of these projects that you can look up online. So in addition to material from our own people, there's also a lot of material that's been gathered about iwi katoa actually, but by Pākehā ethnographers, historians, collectors, and so it's finding that material, interpreting that material, and cross-referencing it, I guess, with our own knowledge and information in order to create the digital atlas. And this image here, we do field trips with that project, and that's about working with our own people on the ground to sort of ground truth these places. So we do research, and that's hugely my role, is doing research, and then we bring that together with the knowledge that our people have on the ground, and that comes together to give us real integrity and authority in terms of our information. And that's the way that we approach actually all of the projects we do, not just Kahuru Manu. The third project I want to talk to you about is called Kairangahau. So Kairangahau is it's that black vine that you see if ever you go for a walk in the New Zealand bush, supplejack. So you could think of it as a tangled mess sometimes. It sort of hangs down from trees. But the idea for using that as the name for this archive database is that it's the idea that you follow the path of the Kairangahau, and it has myriad different points of connection and different trajectories that you can go off in. So I really encourage you, if you're interested in this kaupapa, to go and look at Kairangahau and just search around. So one bit of information will lead to another, and so on. And this is really only in its infancy, this project. We're continuing to work on it. Some of the work that I do in that area is researching marae histories, sourcing old photographs, which is a particular area of interest for me. So this is a photograph at Arahura on the west coast, and that's Tairia, which is an old Rūnanga hall that used to stand at the Arahura Pā there. Another area of my work is doing oral histories, so recording the life stories of our kaumātua. So all of these people on this slide are from Moiraki, one of our kainga, one of our villages, and recording their life stories, and particularly here I was recording their history and memories of the marae. Now, the most important thing about our work, which I think I've said earlier, is that it's for us. It's by us, for us. So in the first instance, we create resources that are for our own people and then assist them to be able to use them and own them, to own that knowledge, which in a lot of instances is knowledge that has been lost. And just buried in archives, and so us rediscovering it, making it accessible to our own first, is a key part of the way we work. And secondly, making it accessible to everyone, and we do that through the fact that our material is largely publicly accessible, and we give public talks and produce publications and different resources. So that's kind of in a nutshell some of the things that I do, but I do lots of things. Really, it's just all about history and memory and working with our people to tell our stories. But how I came to the role, I said before, it's serendipity and osmosis. I actually started here, this library, and initially I did an English degree. I read a lot of novels, I could analyse them. Then I went and worked in a pea factory, so which was miserable. Then I worked here. Well, I worked for a few other jobs and messed around, but then I came here and I was working as a reprographics assistant, which is essentially a glorified term for a photocopier operator. But that was in what was then called the New Zealand room, and so it was working with all the historians and genealogists and people who'd come in, and it really just exposed me to this, well, actually to something I'd loved since I was as a child, which was history. Then at that time, there was only one Māori librarian here, and that was Teece, and she said to me, "You're Māori, come and work with me." And I was the first Māori library assistant that worked at this library, and it's fantastic now that there's a whole team here. So that's pretty cool. And a project that I worked on here with Hanita really set the sort of foundation for everything I've worked on since. So it's a website which is still online. It's called Te Kau Ka Whenua. Made some blunders. Some of them are still there on the page. They haven't been corrected. But I don't really know what I was doing, but I just went out and started interviewing kaumātua and doing research. So it's a place-based sort of history website. It talks about local Māori history, but it also included oral history, and they're two things that I've continued to do for the rest of my career. And on the back of that project, I worked for a local heritage management consultancy, and it's all about connections. Then I worked for Heritage New Zealand and the Māori team, and then I came across to Ngāi Tahu. So I just think if you really do have to have a passion for history and heritage, but the wonderful thing is that basically all of the people who are working in the sector feel the same way. So it's kind of a big whānau. So, kia ora.